All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day and joining us. By us, I mean the Gates Public Library and myself for this presentation on cholesterol and certainly heart health. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Cedrick Batchateu. I have a virtual health and wellness services business, and my mission is simply to promote better health. I'm a graduate of Albany College of Pharmacy, class of 2013, where I obtained my doctorate in pharmacy. And so a little bit about what I do is by bringing these health and wellness seminars, we combine the advantages of nutrition with medical information to promote wellness overall. So to date, we have been speaking for almost 7 years now, and we offer about 11 different topics. If you're interested in learning more, please visit drsed.com or check out my podcast, which is the Self-Care Forum podcast. Very interesting. Before I get started, I want to thank Laura Blackburn for facilitating this. Once again, having me come and present to the Gates Public Library, much like my previous one on gut health. So I hope that this one will be just as informative and beneficial to you and your health. But for today's presentation, we're going to focus on, we're going to talk about cholesterol. We're going to deal with, there are many misconceptions about this, and I want to make it clear, this is not to give you advice for yourself to go out and do anything with your health, but this is for you to talk about it with your physician before you do anything with regards to your health. But this is information that is somewhat different than some of the misconceptions that have been out there. So we're going to talk a little bit about what cholesterol is. We're going to talk about what lipids are. We're going to look at atherosclerosis, and we're going to look at its impact in our country today, how it's commonly diagnosed, what are some misconceptions associated with it, and just natural ways in which to prevent it, of course. And then we will conclude and go into Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please write them down, type them in the chat box. I will stick around for Q&A. So don't feel that, we're going to overlook you. No, I'll stick around for Q&A. So you're more than welcome to relax and write your questions down. We'll get to it in due time. So let's get started. Just what is cholesterol? Okay, well, first let's talk about what comes to mind when people talk about cholesterol. So when you bring up cholesterol, people are right to understand that it's a primary risk factor for cardiovascular disease. As a matter of fact, the currently held belief, the prevailing belief with regards to cholesterol and heart disease is that a diet that's high in saturated fat, trans fats, or even cholesterol will tend to cause heart disease. Another currently held belief is that LDL is bad cholesterol, whereas HDL is good cholesterol. Raise a hand if you've ever heard that. But we also understand that cholesterol deposition along your arteries will tend to block the flow of blood, arterial blood flow. Now, truth be told, a lot of this comes from information that was obtained from the, studies that were conducted over 50 years ago. For example, the diet heart hypothesis is, as it's well known, originated with studies in both animals and humans done more than a half a century ago. Okay, now more recent and higher quality evidence doesn't necessarily support this, support this theory in its entirety, and that's what we're going to talk about. But just to give you an example, a cholesterol feeding study where they fed test subjects 2 to 4 eggs a day actually showed that dietary cholesterol had very little impact on blood cholesterol levels for about 75% of the participants. And so that's something that strays from the narrative. And we'll take a look at why it's not all about our food. But let's talk about cholesterol. What is it? What is its origin? Well, to start off, cholesterol is a soft, waxy, fat-like substance that's typically found in your blood and inside your cells. Actually, they are a component of your cell membrane. It's important to understand that unlike what many people may have heard or thought, cholesterol does not necessarily all come from food. As a matter of fact, the majority of the cholesterol flowing throughout your body comes from your liver. That's right. It's mainly produced by your liver. As a matter of fact, 80% of the cholesterol flowing throughout your body comes from your liver. The remaining 20% can be obtained from foods. And we're talking about foods such as animal products, dairy and eggs, and things such as red meats. Now, cholesterol itself cannot be obtained from plants. This is why a plant-based diet, if you're someone who's struggling with or concerned with heart disease or anything like that, one of the best things you can do is adopt a more plant-based diet, because you won't be getting that extra 20% of additional cholesterol in your bloodstream from plants. Plants do not have any cholesterol to contribute to your blood. Now, one characteristic about cholesterol, which is crucial to understand because it ties into some of the other lipoproteins, is that cholesterol is insoluble in your bloodstream. Okay, what that simply means is that cholesterol has to be transported in the blood by lipoproteins. Now you can think of lipoproteins as taxis, or maybe like an Uber of sorts, right? Cholesterol cannot travel throughout the blood, so it must be carried. Now, I would, as an aside, I would simply ask if you guys, the audience could mute their phone. I'm hearing, or their phone. Maybe we can get rid of the feedback. But having said that, ladies and gentlemen, just to continue on, having said that, the liver is responsible for the predominant amount of cholesterol that's flowing through your blood. And what's interesting about it is that it is a self-regulated quantity, which means that you don't tell your liver how much cholesterol to produce. It produces how much it sees that the body is in need of. So that means there are other mechanisms that are being used by your liver in order to determine whether to produce a lot more cholesterol or lower the production of cholesterol. So it's important to understand exactly what role does cholesterol play in the body. Once we have an understanding of the role that cholesterol plays in the body, we can then come to understand why the body is maybe producing excessive amounts of cholesterol or is not producing enough cholesterol. But it's crucial to understand what roles cholesterol plays in the body. Now, coincidentally, the liver is also the site of action for much of this class of drugs, pharmaceutical prescription drugs called statin drugs. You have your simvastatin, atorvastatin, your Lipotors, Zocor is a simvastatin. You have all these sort of drugs that end with statin drugs. Well, the site of action where they cause a little bit of inflammation to disrupt or reduce cholesterol production is the liver. Now, one interesting thing to understand, because for a lot of us, cholesterol has been demonized. Every time we turn on television and we see a commercial, cholesterol is the big bad wolf. But we've got to understand, ladies and gentlemen, if cholesterol was so bad, then why would the body recycle it? That's right. Cholesterol is actually recycled by the liver. A lot of times when cholesterol is removed from your arteries, it goes back to the liver. Okay, so it is a currency that the body uses for many different things, for many different processes. So it's important to ask ourselves, why is the body producing all of this cholesterol, and why is it even recycling all of this cholesterol? Those two questions are crucial to understand the significance of cholesterol. It's not fair to simply demonize this product, but let's continue. Now, when it comes to what some of the functions cholesterol has in the human body, well, take a look at this. Cholesterol is crucial for things such as hormones, your brain, your digestion and digestive process, your bone health, and even your tissues. Okay, when it comes to hormones, well, cholesterol is used to produce estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, even cortisol, a stress hormone, aldosterone, which is used and crucial for mineral balance in the body. When it comes to your brain, cholesterol actually helps produce your brain, interestingly enough, is also another site of cholesterol production. In fact, 25% of the body's cholesterol level is stored in your brain. As a matter of fact, the myelin sheath which is a segment or a part, the long elongated part of your brain cells, your brain neuron, okay, is composed of 75% cholesterol, or rather, let me rephrase that, 75% of your brain cells, okay, the section known as the myelin sheath, is encapsulated or wrapped up in what is known as cholesterol. So cholesterol plays a crucial role in signal transmission throughout the brain, the ability to remember. A healthy brain, okay, so we've got to understand and appreciate the role this little substance does in our brain health, not just our hormone health. But then when we come over to the role of digestion, well, we have to understand that the liver also creates what are known as bile salts, and these things help break down fats into fatty acids, all right? And that can only occur with the use of cholesterol. So cholesterol helps us with the ultimately helps us in the breaking down of fat into essential fatty acids. When it comes to bones, well, here's an interesting mechanism. When you stand out in the sun, the sunlight that is hitting your skin actually hits and comes into contact with cholesterol. So when your liver makes cholesterol and cholesterol is floating throughout your body, it actually goes to your skin. A lot of it goes to your skin. And so as you're standing out in the sun, the sunlight comes into contact and reacts with the cholesterol, or rather the cholesterol reacts with the sunlight and gets converted into vitamin D, ergocalciferol. Okay, now we know vitamin D helps us maintain strong bones through the absorption, by facilitating the absorption of calcium. Okay, so here we have our bone health is indirectly due to the level of cholesterol or our cholesterol health, because again, the sun converts cholesterol into vitamin D, and vitamin D helps with the absorption of calcium from the foods that we eat. And calcium is what helps keep our bones strong, one of the components. So, and last but not least, our cellular tissues, the integrity of our cells, okay? Cholesterol is an integral component of your cell membranes. What I mean by that is it's used to build and even repair the cell membranes. It's what allows the cell membranes to become permeable. So that means the ability for these cells to absorb nutrients from the blood and even release their waste into the blood. So a healthy cell depends on having a healthy amount of cholesterol along its cell membrane, which is the layer of skin of the cell, if you will. So we can see just from these few examples that cholesterol is crucial for the production of hormones, whether they're sexual hormones, stress hormones, or hormones to help us maintain homeostasis. Cholesterol is crucial for brain health and even mental health. Cholesterol plays a role in the digestive process, the absorption of essential fatty acids. Cholesterol plays a role in the maintaining of strong, healthy bones. Cholesterol even plays a role in the integrity and health of each individual cell, which when multiplied in the millions and billions will ultimately form organs and then organ systems. So cholesterol is actually integral for virtually every single function that takes place in the body. Now, here is where things begin to go south, as they say. This is where a lot of misconception begins to take place. And that comes from the fact that many people have this idea that there's good and bad cholesterol. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, that's just not the case. There's no such thing as good and bad cholesterol. There's only cholesterol. But let me explain the confusion. So there are these things called lipoproteins. Okay, lipoproteins, you can think of lipoproteins as taxis or Uber cars. Okay, you can think of lipoproteins as taxis or Ubers. Essentially, they're transport vehicles. If you remember earlier, a few minutes ago, a few slides prior, I mentioned that cholesterol was insoluble in your blood. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, cholesterol cannot travel inside of your blood all by itself. It has to be carried, it has to be transported throughout the blood. And this is why, ladies and gentlemen, this is why we need the assistance of these lipoproteins for, well, which lipoproteins am I talking about? Well, ladies and gentlemen, here's what I'm talking about. I am talking about the first of which is known as high density lipoprotein. For many of you who are listening to this, you may have been told that this is the good cholesterol. And then there's LDL, low density lipoproteins. And for many of you as before, you may have been told that this is bad cholesterol. And I want to make one thing clear. These two substances are lipoproteins. They are not cholesterol. There you go. So right off the bat, I want to make this clear. There's no such thing as good cholesterol. There's no such thing as bad cholesterol. Okay. You just have two transportation vehicles. One takes you to and one takes you back from. Okay. One goes one way, the other one goes the other way. Okay. It's just that we like one way over the other way. And so we've mistakenly, unfortunately, I don't really know what the cause was, but we then tell people, well, it's good and bad cholesterol. But truthfully, it's not. These are lipoproteins. They're transport mechanisms. They're vehicles. They're not cholesterol. They just, if I take an Uber, for example, if I take a taxi, I don't all of a sudden become the taxi. I'm just a passenger. Okay. So I just want to emphasize that. But let's take a look at why they call HDL good cholesterol and LDL bad cholesterol. Well, for starters, HDL, again, it's a lipoprotein. It's differentiated by the fact that it has high density, okay? A high density lipoprotein, HDL. There's no C there for cholesterol, okay? Now, its function is to transport cholesterol that's in the blood back to the liver. And I want you to remember, the liver recycles cholesterol, okay, which lets you know you only recycle what is precious, what is valuable, okay? So if it can be reused, it will be reused. Now, HDL is also known as good cholesterol because it signifies, when you have a lot of HDL activity going on, it generally signifies that cholesterol is being removed from your arteries. The plaque or the roadblock that develops when cholesterol gets deposited along our arteries, when HDL is very active, HDL is going to take them away bit by bit and essentially reopen that pathway. You can think of it when you're driving along a road and then there's construction workers who've blocked off one side of the road. So everyone has to slow down and then merge into this narrow line, and it slows down traffic and everything. Well, that's kind of what a plaque does. It blocks the artery or part of the artery and slows down blood flow. But HDL activity signifies that that plaque is being cleaned up, it's being removed. Okay, now ideal values is when you go to your physician, they'll tell you that they want greater than 60 milligram per deciliter. Now, on the other hand, let's take a look at LDL, otherwise known as low density lipoprotein. Again, it's a lipoprotein, not cholesterol. There's only one cholesterol, not good and bad. Much like HDL, LDL is a transport vehicle. What it does is it transports cholesterol from your liver to the site of inflammation or injury. Now, I want to pause here and I want to emphasize that if you're listening to this, all of this, everything we're going to talk about, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's called inflammation. Inflammation is the key villain, okay, the head honcho, the bad guy, okay? It's the source, it's the culprit, it's the villain in this story of heart disease, heart attacks. It's inflammation. And we'll get into a little bit of why later on. But the LDL has an unfortunate moniker as bad cholesterol because greater LDL activity generally signifies that cholesterol is being taken from the liver. Remember, the liver produces 80% plus of the total cholesterol in your blood. LDL goes and takes that cholesterol and takes it to the site of injury. Okay, you have to understand, it'll take it to the site of injury, or it'll take it to, wherever cholesterol needs to go. Maybe the skin to be exposed to the light, maybe your digestive system, the liver for bile salt, maybe to be converted into hormones. But essentially, these are transportation vehicles. But the reason LDL has a bad moniker as bad cholesterol is that it's generally responsible for taking cholesterol from your liver, driving it all the way to the site of inflammatory reaction, which is where the inflammation has taken place along your arteries, and deposited it there. So think of it, again, the analogy of the construction workers doing construction on the road. LDL is the vehicle that takes those construction workers from their office, home office, to the roadside where there's been, maybe a crack in the road, or they're trying to fill in, they're trying to patch up the road. Maybe it's gotten a little bumpy or something. So the vehicle that takes them to that job site is LDL. But when the job is done, the vehicle that takes them from that job site to the rest of the to their back office is HDL. So that's another way to remember. Now, as far as ideal values, your doctor, they will want your LDL levels to be less than 100 milligrams per deciliter. Now, there's another category of lipoproteins called triglyceride. Now, it's not going to play a major role in this presentation, because I think LDL and HDL are sort of the main things that I wanted to demystify. But essentially, think about triglycerides like this. Excess calories are turned into triglycerides as a form of storage, and then they are stored into your fat cells. So these are not necessarily the best things to have in excess amounts. Lipoproteins are also responsible for transportation or transporting and circulating triglycerides in your bloodstream. So much like they do for cholesterol, they are also responsible for transporting triglycerides throughout your bloodstream. Now, everything I've just said, this simple image is to illustrate it and reinforce the point that I made. When your liver produces cholesterol, remember, the liver produces the majority of cholesterol that is in your body. When the liver produces cholesterol, gets taken from the liver into anywhere in the body. In this case, the site of inflammation or inflammatory damage. It's the LDL lipoprotein, the low density lipoprotein, that's the vehicle to transport cholesterol to the site of arterial damage. And once the road has been fixed, essentially once the artery has been fixed, the cholesterol has to be removed. And so it is the HDL, high density lipoprotein vehicle, that's going to transport cholesterol from the site of damage back to your liver to be recycled if it can, or excreted, gotten rid of. But this is the illustration. And so we've gotten in the habit, unfortunately, to call LDL bad and HDL good. But ladies and gentlemen, they have a function. The firefighter who takes the fire truck to go to a scene of a burning home, the fire truck is not a bad vehicle because it's taking the firemen to the site of inflammatory, or the site of a burning house or a burning building. We cannot blame the transportation vehicle. It's just doing the job it was created for. Now, earlier I said that inflammation was the key point that I wanted you to take away from this presentation. And that's because inflammation is really the main culprit behind what we know as atherosclerosis, which simply means or signifies plaque buildup. Okay, now take a look at the illustration with the arteries. When you're born, generally speaking, when you're born, you are given clean arteries. Think about it as brand new shoes, right? No scuff, no guff, no scratches, no cuts or bruises on the shoes. The shoes are fine. The shoes are beautiful. They're brand spanking new. But after years of wearing those shoes, walking in mud, walking in sand, walking on rocks, running in those shoes, walking in water, maybe, the shoes will begin to experience some wear and tear. And so the same thing applies to your arteries. After years of maybe eating a certain way, living a certain way, some habits are more harmful than others, smoking, drinking, not exercising, not drinking enough water, not getting enough antioxidants or minerals in your diet. Those things will tend to worsen the inflammatory process. But essentially, plaque buildup occurs when your arteries sustain damage. So any damage to the arteries can actually lead to what's known as an inflammatory response. Now, under in an inflammatory response, what happens is your arteries become permeable, which means think of it like opening the blinds or opening the window slightly. They open up a little bit just to allow the inflammatory or the immune response to come there. So you have all these cells that are going to sense danger, and they're going to flood to the site of the danger, akin to firefighters coming to the scene of the burning building. Okay, and so the process is the endothelium or the artery walls will become permeable, which means they open up. The liver will respond to the arterial damage by producing or increasing the production of cholesterol. Okay, and this is where we get into yet another function of cholesterol, in addition to the 5 crucial and important, vitally important functions we mentioned earlier. Cholesterol, ladies and gentlemen, acts like a Band-Aid. It's a soft, waxy, and sticky substance. So cholesterol, ladies and gentlemen, is a Band-Aid. So think of it like this. If your window was broken during the winter, and you had to call the window repairman, but the window repairman or woman was busy and they couldn't fit you in for a couple of days, maybe a week or so. And so you're not going to allow the cold air from outside to rush into your home, for the week that you're waiting for the window repairman. What are you going to do? You're going to get plastic. You're going to get some plastic and you're going to tape it around your window, which is going to not work as well as the window itself, but it's going to slow down the amount of draft that actually leaks into your home, right? So think of cholesterol like that. It's a stopgap. It's not a fix, but it's a stopgap. It's a Band-Aid. It's a temporary solution, okay? So when the liver senses danger or trouble along your arteries or arterial damage, it increases cholesterol production. But we have a problem. Cholesterol cannot go from your liver to your heart or wherever else the site of arterial inflammation takes place. So what has to happen, ladies and gentlemen? There has to be a transport mechanism that's going to take the cholesterol from your liver and bring it to your heart. Let's assume the inflammatory reaction took place in and around your heart. So there has to be a transport vehicle that's going to take cholesterol from your heart, from your liver to your heart, okay? And that vehicle, ladies and gentlemen, is LDL, low density lipoprotein. Again, not cholesterol, not good cholesterol, not bad cholesterol, just a transport vehicle. And so this is the 6th function of cholesterol, and perhaps the most misunderstood, yet one of the most important functions of cholesterol. Cholesterol bandages arterial damage by building plaque. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, cholesterol is not trying to kill you. It's trying to buy you time to heal. Okay, it's trying to buy you time to heal. Unfortunately, many of us don't see this and we don't understand. And we don't understand that, hey, if we continue to do the behaviors that are harmful to our health, these inflammatory reactions will only increase, prompting further and further deposition of cholesterol. And that increased deposition of cholesterol will begin to block more and more of your arteries, thus leaving a narrower and smaller path for blood to flow. Okay, now, why does this tend to happen along your arteries and not necessarily your veins? Well, that's because if you flex a certain way, your arm or your muscles are, stretch, you can generally see your veins. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, veins are generally much bigger than arteries. Arteries are tiny, tiny, tiny tubes that are connecting virtually every part of your body. And that has to be so because arteries carry oxygen-rich blood from your heart to every part of your body, every cell, every organ, every corner, every tip of your surface, every part of your body has arteries leading there. You can think of arteries as the roads, and you can think of veins as the highways, okay? They're much bigger, and there's a lot less in terms of individual miles than roads are nationwide. So arteries carry oxygen-rich blood from your heart to every cell, and every part of your body. And it has to, because that's how cells are able to get oxygen and get nutrients. So it goes from the heart to the body. They're much smaller than veins. They're much more flexible, and they tend to be weaker. So it tends to be more subject. Arteries tend to be more subjected to inflammatory damage than veins. Veins tend to be much bigger, much bigger than arteries. So, veins think of them like the highways. So once the oxygen-rich blood has given away all its oxygen and nutrients to the cells then dump their waste in there, and it then goes and collects into your veins, and the vein brings it all back to the heart for the CO2 to be breathed out and to be reoxygenated. So that's the main difference between arteries and veins. So arteries tend to be much more subject to inflammatory damage and cholesterol deposition. Now, what are some risk factors for this thing, atherosclerosis, otherwise known as plaque buildup or plaque deposit due to cholesterol? Well, again, it all has to do with lifestyle. We have to understand that atherosclerosis develops gradually with aging. So if you live long enough, you're going to experience it. So what are some risk factors for atherosclerosis? Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look. You have a lack of exercise. You have high blood pressure. If you're someone who's experienced high blood pressure over long periods of time, you have a family history. Now, just to go in a little bit more detail, the lack of exercise, ladies and gentlemen, we have to understand that regular exercise is really good for the heart. It actually encourages oxygen and blood flow. It encourages greater oxygen and blood flow, right? As far as high blood pressure is concerned, well, think about it. Your arteries are much weaker than your veins, and they're more subject to break-ins. And so anything that damages your blood vessels by making them, by constantly adding pressure, the act of constantly adding pressure, high blood pressure will tend to damage your arteries over time, because arteries are though they're flexible, they're still much weaker and more likely to be subject to break. So that constant pressure will eventually wear it down. Smoking. Well, smoking exposes your body to thousands of chemical compounds, harmful chemical compounds, which will cause damage along your body in the form of what's known as free radicals. Long story short, smoking can actually damage your blood vessels and even your heart and heart function. Diabetes. Now, think about this. If I took a bottle of water and I added sugar in this water, and I constantly added sugar in this water, eventually the water itself would become sweet. The water itself would become thick. And that's just it, ladies and gentlemen. The fact that the water itself would become thick is part of the problem. The fact that the water itself would become thick is reason enough to signify the impact diabetes has on the body. Here's what I mean. As water becomes thicker, okay, it does not flow as smooth as it normally would, right? It doesn't flow as smooth as it normally would. So now it's like a slush-like, it's slower, it doesn't travel as fast. So now the heart may have to pump a little harder, a little faster, just to get that slush to go where it needs to go. So think about that. That's what diabetes is. Essentially, it's unwanted sugar in the blood. It thickens your blood. It slows down the flow of the blood, so cells don't get the nutrients they need when they need it. Everything is delayed. Everything is backed up. Think about a highway traffic jam in LA, for example. Okay, that's kind of what diabetes or high blood sugar does to your blood. Excess sugar does in the presence of your blood. And then there's also family history. Some people are predisposed. Familial hypercholesterolemia is one genetic disease where people tend to produce or overproduce cholesterol for very little reason. The liver just can't seem to turn itself off. And so we're going to take a look at that briefly. Now, familial hypercholesterolemia, essentially what I just mentioned, is a genetic condition characterized by high levels of LDL as well as elevated cholesterol level. Okay, and this is essentially the liver turns its cholesterol production on, but unlike for the majority of people, it doesn't shut off. It doesn't know when it's produced enough cholesterol. So it's akin to leaving a machine on over and over and over and over. Now, this can obviously lead to some complications. For example, if you have excessive amounts of cholesterol, over and beyond what you need for your heart, your brain, your bones, your hormones, over and beyond. But the machine, the liver, just won't stop producing it. Ladies and gentlemen, while many people who suffer from familial hypercholesterolemia are prone to having heart attacks at an earlier age, because that cholesterol is constantly being deposited along your arteries, if for no reason at all. And then as the arteries begin to narrow, it gets harder and harder for the heart. The heart has to pump harder and harder, and of course that can tire it out or lead to heart attacks. Many people that have familial hypercholesterolemia will likely experience severe heart disease and essentially long-term atherosclerosis. Again, long-term plaque buildup, because it's constantly producing it. It doesn't know when to turn off. Unfortunately for those people, there's not too much, well, I guess they're better off now than they were before, because at least now we can give them, your doctor will generally prescribe some form of statin drug. Again, statin drugs are those classes of medications such as simvastatin, atorvastatin, fluvastatin, that will generally go and inflame your liver, right? It's sort of like, think of World War II bombing a factory, so it stops producing weapons. So it'll start attacking or inflaming the liver and stopping or reducing the production of cholesterol. So people with this genetic condition will tend to be taking a statin all the time, every day. Now, some lifestyle changes that can be made include increasing lean proteins, right? You want to cut off red meats and just focus on the lean ones. Add more fruits and vegetables. Remember, plant-based diets, plant-based foods, plant foods, let me rephrase that, generally do not have additional cholesterol. They do not add additional cholesterol. And of course, you want to reduce sugar and alcohol consumption, because those things are crucial in the cause in promoting inflammation in the body, especially sugar. Sugar is inflammatory. Think of sugar like an incendiary bomb, okay? One of those napalm bombs, just sets everything on fire, especially when you consume a lot of this refined sugar. Now, that deposition of cholesterol along your arteries, also known as atherosclerosis, will lead to can manifest as several different symptoms. For example, atherosclerosis itself will manifest as chest pain, or known as angina pain in your leg or your arm. You may experience shortness of breath. Fatigue is common, confusion, right? Because again, circulation to the brain may be halted or reduced because again, there's cholesterol being deposited along the vessel that takes blood to the brain. And of course, muscle weakness in your legs. Again, all of this is due to a lack or a reduction in blood flow, in blood circulation. It can unfortunately lead to a heart attack, signified by chest pain or discomfort, pain in your shoulder, your back, your neck, your arms, or even your jaw. Abdominal pain, feelings of lightheadedness, symptoms of vomiting, nausea, and this weird sense of impending doom. That's actually a trait of heart attacks. You feel that something's going to happen. And then, of course, there's also the category of strokes. Okay, strokes has, there's an acronym used which tells us the characteristics of stroke. It's called BFAST. The B is for loss of balance, eyes, blurred vision is also another symptom. Face will generally droop. Your arms will experience weakness. You're not going to be able to keep them up for much longer. You may have difficulty speaking. You may be slurring your words. And so if you're experiencing those symptoms, then it's T for time to call an ambulance. So, chest pain is common. Unfortunately, it can lead to a heart attack or even worse. I don't know if it's worse than a stroke, but essentially a stroke will essentially reduce your brain function the longer it goes. And so strokes can be crippling, if you will. Now, What are some statistics with regards to atherosclerosis? Well, today, the #1 cause of death is heart disease, for men, women, and all ethnic groups. Heart disease is the #1 cause of men in America. Despite the pandemic, it is still heart disease. In fact, one person dies every 36 seconds from cardiovascular diseases. As a matter of fact, according to the CDC, 1 in 4 Americans will die annually from heart disease. So, this is a chronic problem. This affects so many of us, especially older folks. The older you get, the more likely you're going to experience these chronic conditions. And of course, heart disease costs the United States $219 billion annually, just in terms of medical expenses. Here we have a map of these United States. Now, this map will tell us the adults age 45 years old and above and older who reported having had a coronary heart disease or a stroke or both. Okay, so this is a map essentially giving us a picture of how many people per state, what percentage of people per state, of adults per state, who have experienced either some form of coronary heart disease or a stroke. The darker the blue or the darker the hue, the more or the greater percentage of the population have experienced some sort of coronary heart disease or stroke. And the lighter the hue, the lower the number. So you have the references or the legend to the lower right-hand side. And so in New York State, about 12.7% of adults 45 years and older have experienced some sort of coronary heart disease or stroke. Now, if you compare it to maybe the what's known as the Bible Belt, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, they tend to have, Arkansas, they tend to have a greater percentage of adults who've experienced these things. Some of the lower states include New Hampshire, it seems Massachusetts, California, Colorado, New Mexico, even Alaska, and Hawaii, of course. So those states tend to be really doing very well in terms of having lower percentages of coronary heart disease or strokes amongst their adults age 45 years and older. So this is more so an interactive, this is the interactive part of our presentation. So I just want you to think about this, okay? We have 3 categories or 3 types of questions to ask the audience. Now, you have those age 45 to 64 and those age 65 and above. Of those 2 age groups, so we can say 65 and above, 64 and below, of those 2 age groups, which of those 2 age groups do you believe has a higher percentage of men or women or people who have experienced some form of coronary heart disease? Well, does anyone have any answer? Okay, so here's what the statistics show. 7.1% of those aged between 45 to 64 have experienced some form of coronary heart disease, whereas 17% of those 65 years old, that's almost 1 in 5 men and women, 1 of 5 adults age 65 and older have experienced some form of coronary heart disease. Now, when you think about it, okay, going back to the analogy of the shoe, the longer you have something, okay, the more likely it is to be damaged, right? So when you're born, you're given these brand spanking new arteries, but over time, as you live and you eat and drink and maybe do some things that are not the healthiest, okay, the damage builds up. Okay, and eventually it catches up to you. And as we can see, for those 65 years and older, it's catching up to at least 1 in 5 of them, okay, or 1 in 6, maybe a more accurate number. Okay, so it is understandable that those who are older will tend to experience more coronary heart diseases than those who are younger. Now, when we look at the genders, men and women in the United States, and of course, this is only with regards to adult. When we look at the gender, we see that 13.6% of men experience coronary heart disease compared to 8.4% of women. Okay, I'd love to know why you may think that men tend to experience this more so than women. My theory, or one thing that comes to mind, is that women tend to be a little bit more health conscious. They're more likely to eat a salad or eat, a plant-based diet, or incorporate more greens to their diets than men. Again, it could just be something that I've been exposed to or in my environment. It doesn't mean it's universal, but generally speaking, I've seen women more mindful of what they were eating. I've seen more women more mindful of what they were eating than men, but of course, that's just my experience. Yours may be different. Now, of course, when we look at amongst the four major groups of ethnic groups in the United States, and of course, these only apply to those in the United States. When we look at white Americans, or European Americans, or Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans, when we look at all four of these groups and we look at the prevalence of coronary heart disease among them, here's what we find. We find that it's highest amongst white Americans, followed by Black Americans, then Hispanic Americans, and much lower and lowest in Asian Americans at about 6.3% of them. So it tends to be higher in white Americans, followed by Black Americans, then Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans. Now, of course, these statistics do not reflect, they do not reflect those same ethnic groups outside of the United States. They do not reflect those same ethnic groups outside of the United States. So and also another interesting tidbit is that the prevalence of coronary heart disease was lower in adults with more years of formal education. So for example, it was found to be about 11% for those with post-high school education, actually 10.9%. And for those with less than a high school diploma, about 16.5% of them experience coronary heart disease. So it seems that the more of an education people get, the lower the likelihood of, statistically speaking, of them experiencing coronary heart disease. Now, I don't think it's the education. Well, let me rephrase that. I think that maybe they're making one reason to explain this phenomenon is that they may be making more of an effort to eating healthier. Maybe they earn a little bit more, and so they're able to afford a little bit more on healthier foods or better foods or more greens. I don't know. You decide, but these are just some things that, I think about. Now, with regards to diagnosis, so we understand the many benefits and functions of cholesterol. That we do understand. And we understand that cholesterol is crucial, and it's been sadly demonized as good and bad. But the good and bad are not actually cholesterol, the lipoproteins. They are transport vehicles. And so their job is to deposit cholesterol along your arteries, or remove them from the arteries to bring them back to the liver to be recycled. Now that we understand that, and we also have an understanding that the key villain, the key bad guy in all of this heart disease, coronary heart disease, is inflammation. It's about the cause of inflammation, and inflammation damages the arteries. And so cholesterol acts as a Band-Aid to patch up the arteries until it can be fixed later on. So now that we know that, we have to, when you go to your physician, they're going to generally run some sort of lipid test on you. And this test will generally show your total cholesterol. And as you can see here, I wanted to illustrate this. It still calls LDL cholesterol. Ladies and gentlemen, LDL is a lipoprotein. So as you see in the illustration from this chart, it has LDL cholesterol, which is what many doctors' offices may display. But again, I want you to think of it as a lipoprotein. It's a transport vehicle. It is not cholesterol. So you have HDL lipoprotein. It's not cholesterol. You have triglycerides. You have non-HDL. C, again, remove the C. Then you have triglycerides to HDL ratio. But essentially, when you go to your doctor, you're going to get these lab values when they run your blood. So there are different blood tests that can be used to check your cholesterol levels. The first thing, there are different tests. They can run a blood test to check your cholesterol level, and you're going to get a chart such as this with numbers and values that can be used to tell you whether it's optimal, it's intermediate, it's high, or it's low. Now, Another test that can be done to diagnose whether you have some sort of coronary heart disease is a cardiac angiogram, which is essentially a chest X-ray that's taken after your arteries are injected with some sort of radioactive dye. So it allows the physician to see what's happening inside of you because they've injected a radioactive dye inside of you. Another test is the electrocardiogram, which measures the electrical activity in your heart to look for any areas of decreased blood flow or irregularities. There's also another test that can be performed is the stress test. Essentially, the stress test monitors your heart rate and blood glucose, and blood pressure while you're doing some form of exercise on a treadmill or a stationary bike. So it measures how well your heart handles stress. And then there's another one is the MRI, the magnetic resonance angiography. Essentially, this creates a picture of the large arteries in your body, and the doctor is able to use this to see if there's anything abnormal, anything out of the blue, out of normal, and anything that needs to be intervened on. So these are some of the tests that can be done when you go to your doctor and they, or maybe even your cardiologist, and asked to be checked. Now, again, let's go back to the misconceptions that we've addressed. The fact is this: cardiovascular disease is one of the most misdiagnosed and mistreated conditions in medicine. We've learned a tremendous amount of what causes heart disease over the past decade, but the medical approach is really still based on science from 40 to 50 years ago. Okay, now going forward, now that we have an understanding of the importance and significance of cholesterol, now that we have an understanding of the role of LDL and HDL, they're not cholesterol, they're transport vehicles. And now that we understand that what damages arteries are inflammatory mechanisms, okay, inflammation is a culprit, I'm going to show you how the real villain is actually inflammation. It's not, all of these different things. It's anything that can increase inflammation in your body. Now, we're going to demonstrate that high cholesterol is not the primary cause of heart disease, not the primary cause, okay? Diets high in saturated fats and cholesterol don't necessarily cause heart disease. The consumption of these so-called heart-healthy foods and heart-healthy vegetable oils is actually linked to heart disease, cancer, and many other conditions. Give you an example. There was a prospective study that involved over 350,000 participants. And so what they did in this prospective study, they found no association between saturated fat and heart disease. As a matter of fact, low carb diets will tend to be high in saturated fats are beneficial for cardiovascular disease. And there's such a thing as, instead of good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, we should be thinking in terms of good fats, bad fats. Good fats are things that are unprocessed, naturally occurring, such as olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, okay? Saturated fats, to be defined, are tightly packed. They generally don't have a double bond. They tend to be solid at room temperature, okay? They can come from meats, dairy, coconut, even palm oil, okay? And unsaturated fats are loosely packed. They tend to appear as liquids at room temperature. You simply just have to go to your local grocery store and you'll see a whole row of liquid cooking and vegetable oils, okay? They can include things such as, peanut oil, seed oil, canola oils, fish oil, nut oil, okay? So we have to understand that there's such a thing as good fat and bad fats. And unfortunately, a lot of people are blaming cholesterol for cardiovascular disease, but they are not understanding that cholesterol is simply a band-aid. It is in response to the damages due to some of the unhealthy oils that we're eating, some of the unhealthy things that we're consuming and exposing ourselves to, which increase inflammation in the body. All right, so I want to give you an illustration, okay? This is a way to think about this. Let's say you just purchased a new house, Okay, and the new house is beautiful. It's perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. And so the new house represents the arteries that you're born with. Most of us are born with. Okay, they're clean. It's a nice tube. It's ready to push blood through and carry blood and not leak or not do anything. Okay, but let's say one day while living in this beautiful home that you now have, you forgot an ingredient at the local store and you left the stove on and you left the kitchen and you went to the grocery store to pick up an extra ingredient. But unfortunately, while you were away, the gas was on and a couple of things, a series of unfortunate events happen, and boom, your house catches on fire. Now your neighbor sees this fire and calls 911 and tells them to send the fire department because he sees, your kitchen or part of your house is on fire. All right. Now this explosion represents inflammation. Okay. So it represents essentially some sort of damage along your arteries. Now, the government, the town is going to send or dispatch, the 911 dispatcher is going to dispatch the firefighters. Okay, the firefighter's job is to go there and put out the flame. Right now, in this scenario, the firefighters represent cholesterol. Okay, their job is to go there and patch the site of inflammatory damage. But in this particular scenario, the fire not only burns your house, but it spreads to your neighbor's house and it spreads to your neighbor's house. And so the fire is growing uncontrollably. So now it's not just fire trucks from one firehouse, but other firehouses have to send their men, their firefighters to the site of the flames in order to try to put out and contain this huge blaze that's taking place and burning down the whole block. And so this is what happens when inflammation continues to occur over the years. What the body does is it continues to apply and deposit cholesterol along the arteries that have been damaged and that continue to be damaged. And so the additional or excessive deposition of cholesterol eventually narrows, as you can see from the artery, eventually it narrows the path in which blood flows and makes it more difficult for blood to flow, which means the heart has to pump harder. And eventually a clot can occur, or eventually it just gets so narrow that blood just can't pass through anymore. And this is where you will tend to have a heart attack or a stroke, or you'll start by experiencing chest pain, a heart attack or a stroke, depending on where the cholesterol is being deposited, and the person dies. And so the coroner does an autopsy and they look through the dead body of the person and say, well, gee, no wonder they died. Look, their arteries, along their heart was completely blocked. So of course, blood couldn't flow anywhere because the arteries was completely blocked by cholesterol. And so in this scenario, in this hypothetical scenario, we blame cholesterol for the person dying. We blame cholesterol for the fact that the person's heart stopped. It couldn't push blood any further because the artery was completely blocked with cholesterol. But what we forget, ladies and gentlemen, is that cholesterol was a Band-Aid. It's meant to buy you time to change your lifestyle. It's meant to buy you time to change your habits. It's meant to save you or help save you. But what happens is when we continue to do the things that we do, the harmful things that we do, when we start out smoking one cigarette a day, 10 years later, we're smoking a whole pack of cigarettes a day. When we start out drinking one glass of beer a day, 10 years later, we're drinking, a whole 6-pack a day. Okay. When we start out by, exercising once a week, and then 10 years later, we're exercising once a month. When we start out by drinking one glass of soda a day, but then a couple of years later, we're drinking, 3-4 cans of soda. When we increase the level of vices that we do, these harmful behaviors, when we do these things, ladies and gentlemen, okay, you're going to have more arterial inflammation. You're going to have more inflammation along your arteries, prompting the need for the liver to produce even more cholesterol, which then gets deposited. Unfortunately, when things catch up to us, when we have a heart attack or a stroke, or unfortunately die, and we get the autopsy done, the coroner finds that our arteries are blocked. And so cholesterol gets demonized when cholesterol was buying you time. See, what happens is, ladies and gentlemen, if cholesterol is not deposited along your arteries, well, then you're going to have internal bleeding. Because if your arteries are damaged, okay, then as the blood flows, it's going to start leaking. So think about this bottle, water bottle. As the water is flowing, everything is maintained within the structure of the bottle. But if I poke a hole anywhere along this water bottle, okay, as the water is flowing back and forth, as it goes over the hole, it's going to start leaking. So without cholesterol, we'd likely have or experience internal bleeding. With cholesterol, ladies and gentlemen, cholesterol is offering us a Band-Aid. And so what do? We demonize cholesterol, and you go to the doctor, and the doctor gives you a statin drug. But the root cause, ladies and gentlemen, was inflammation. So I think if we take a different approach in terms of thinking about the root cause, not just what we see, but what is prompting cholesterol to be deposited, we then start to look at what causes inflammation in the body. And we understand and appreciate the fact that cholesterol is crucial for our health and well-being. And so in this scenario, going back to the scenario of the firefighters, imagine if a couple of blocks, a couple of houses burned down, and then the local news team flies a helicopter over the scene of damage. And as the smoke clears, lo and behold, a bunch of firefighters are left at the scene of the crime. They're left there where the house is burned because they spent all night working to put the blazes out, right? Now, imagine how ludicrous it would be if our judge said, you know what, those firefighters were last spotted at the scene of the crime. Therefore, it is likely that they're the ones who burnt down these homes. Therefore, we must put them in jail. That's exactly what we're doing to cholesterol. Simply because cholesterol was at the scene of the crime does not mean it is the causative agent, ladies and gentlemen. Cholesterol was trying to save you. But the excessive amounts of inflammatory reactions that took place along your arteries prompted more and more cholesterol to be deposited over years, and ultimately leading to the artery being clogged or blocked and the heart giving out. That is the misconception of cholesterol. Of course, just to give you a little bit more on the importance and the significance of cholesterol. These are taken from several studies, and I'm just going to summarize them. Studies have shown that low cholesterol is linked with mental health and brain disorders. Now remember, the myelin sheath, your brain nerves, are made up of about 75% cholesterol. The brain produces its own. Okay, so cholesterol plays a crucial role in our brain health. Men with low cholesterol, one study found that men with low cholesterol were 7 times more likely to die. Depression was 3 times more likely in men with low cholesterol. Okay, women with low cholesterol tended to suffer more depressive symptoms. It was from a Swedish study. Low cholesterol has been associated with increased risk of dementia. And low cholesterol levels has been linked with Alzheimer's disease. It's from the European Journal of Internal Medicine. So ladies and gentlemen, what are we saying? We're saying that cholesterol is vitally important for your health. Cholesterol is not just important for your heart health, but it's also important for your brain health, your bone health, your hormonal health, your mental health. And so along the spirit of misconception, I want you to understand that we've got to shift our focus. And if you're watching this, if you're listening to this, we've got to have these conversations with our doctors. Okay, this isn't for you to go and treat yourself or do anything or diagnose you. This is for you to have a conversation with your primary care. Okay, because a lot of our care is focused on suppressing the symptoms. What I mean by that is if you have high blood pressure, well, let's lower it. If you're experiencing high blood sugar, well, let's lower it. If you have high cholesterol levels, then let's lower it. But ladies and gentlemen, that does not address the root cause. It does not deal permanently with the problem. It simply suppresses the symptoms. Okay, and so how do we what is a symptomatic approach to high cholesterol? Well, we use statin drugs, again, the simvastatin, the atorvastatin, right? And so these are used to reduce lipids and cholesterol levels. And ladies and gentlemen, they work by blocking a liver enzyme known as HMG-CoAce reductase that makes cholesterol. Side effects of statins include muscle pain, insomnia, nerve damage, digestive issues, okay? You can experience dizziness, and some examples of statin drugs are Lipitor, Lescol, Pravachol, or Pravastatin, so of course, simvastatin, Crestor, and Livalo. Okay, so the analogy that I want to give you is this: all of those things are meant to suppress the symptoms, the symptom of high cholesterol. Okay, but if we wanted to take an approach that looks at the root cause, here's what we would do. Think back to a weed in a garden. Okay, if every day all you do is mow the garden and mow the weeds, when you go to bed and you wake up in the morning, right, what do you see? You see the weed, it's grown back. Why? Because you have not uprooted it. And so what that means is if you wear a glove and you dig down deep and you uproot that weed, you'll never have to deal with it again. You will never have to deal with it again. It's one and done. And that's what we have to do. We have to understand cholesterol is crucial, it's important, it's significant. It's vitally important for our health. And then we've got to understand that inflammation is the culprit. Therefore, instead of suppressing cholesterol, high cholesterol with statin drugs, what we've got to do is we've got to pull the weed of inflammation from its metaphorical roots. Okay, we've got to pull it up and out. And so that means we now have to look at the root cause of inflammation. What are sources of inflammation that are taking place in the body? Okay, so as we get there, let's take a look. These are some root causes of high LDL. Now, of course, LDL is known as low density lipoprotein. It's often misknown as bad cholesterol, okay? But just some common root causes of high cholesterol include metabolic syndrome. These are things such as if you're someone who's experiencing obesity, cholesterol, blood pressure, insulin resistance, and inflammation. It tends to be common. It's more likely that you'll experience high levels of LDL. It's also affected by thyroid hormones. Infection also plays a role in it. Studies show that lipids increase in an attempt to help the body fight off infections, right? Because the lipids are they're transport vehicles. So if you have a battle taking place in one part of town, you need a transportation vehicle that's going to take the soldiers there. And of course, we mentioned that there's genetic familial hypercholesterolemia, okay, which affects 1 in a million people. Unfortunately, many of them tend to die on average before 25. And that's because LDL is unable to bind the defective cell receptors and deliver the nutrients. So you constantly and chronically experience high blood cholesterol levels. So what can you do with regards to inflammation? Well, now that we know that some of these things are some of the things that are causing these issues of elevated lipoproteins, well, first thing you want to do is address the metabolic syndrome. And that means, ladies and gentlemen, consider a low-carb, plant-based, or even paleo diet. Okay, try and get at least 10 to 15% of your daily calories from carbs, but you want to incorporate more plants. Okay, more vegetables in your diet. Improve insulin. It can also help improve it. With regards to your thyroid hormones, screen for gluten intolerance, test for iodine deficiency, test for metabolic syndrome. In terms of infection, look at leaky gut. The gut is the biggest organ in your immune system. Look at leaky gut and small intestine bacterial overgrowth. Consider adding a probiotic to your diet, the digestive enzymes, reducing carbs. And then for those who have experiencing genetically based familial hypercholesterolemia, consider statin drugs, which is really what you can do. Or also an alternative to statin drugs are red yeast rice, if maybe you're very sensitive to the side effects, such as the muscle pain or rhabdomyolysis associated with statin drugs. And so here are ways in which we've now reached essentially the end of our presentation, but I want to leave you with this. Here are ways in which you can really increase or alter your numbers. For example, some of the tests, you want to have HDL greater, again, high density lipoprotein, a transport molecule, not cholesterol. You want it to be greater than 60 milligram per deciliter. LDL, you want it to be less than 100 milligram per deciliter. And then they advise total cholesterol less than 200. That's what the standard medical approach is. Look for your thyroid function. Talk to your doctor about maybe leaky gut. Maybe you're someone who experiences familial hypercholesterolemia, and also talk to your doctor about metabolic syndrome. If you're someone who's experiencing those things, then you want to take an approach aforementioned, such as changing the diet and changing the lifestyle, incorporating exercise into your life. Now, what I will say is this: if you're someone who is concerned with cholesterol, here's a list of things that I would encourage you to avoid. Avoid excess refined sugars and carbs. Reduce your intake of carbs, not all of them, just reduce them and replace them, right? We're not saying starve, we're saying replace them with plant-based foods. Avoid hydrogenated oils that are full of trans fats, such as, margarine, anything, that's been deep fried and baked with, with a lot of these hydrogenated oils. Reduce consumption of white breads, processed meats. Be mindful that a lot of juices and sodas are packed full of, excess sugars. Try to eat your meat, done, but not too well done. What we're trying to do is avoid burnt meats, like the grill marks, just because they're full of acrylamides. These things have been linked with cancer. So they cause all sorts of inflammatory reaction in your body when you consume them. Learn to deal with your stresses. Avoid smoking or the taking or the use of illicit use of drugs or illegal drugs. So just be mindful of those things. As some things that you want to do. Increase your physical activity. Make sure you incorporate essential fatty acids, omegas 3, 6, and 9 into your diet. Make sure you're consuming antioxidants. Antioxidants work to really remove a lot of the free radicals. They bind to them, these unstable free radical molecules, and you get rid of them through your bowel movements, right? Some examples are grapefruit seed extract, noni, CoQ10. Increase the amount of fruits you consume, vegetables and green foods that you're consuming. Consider iodine, and selenium if you talk to your doctor if you're experiencing thyroid issues. Consider expeller pressed oils. Essentially the ones that are saturated fats, that tend to be solid at room temperature, such as coconut oil. They're really good. Consider probiotics and adding digestive enzymes, and even the use of red yeast rice into your diet. And of course, exercise, be active, run, give your heart a chance to exercise. So these are some situations or suggestions that I would say, you can incorporate into your life. Of course, this is not medical advice. You can talk to your primary care physician about these things, but these are things that you can bring up. And now that they can also help you. But of course, talk to your doctor about these things, but they'll definitely help reduce inflammation in the body, thus reduce the need for cholesterol to be deposited along your arteries. So having said that, I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. I want to thank the Gates Public Library and certainly Laura Blackburn for facilitating this. You've just now sat through my cholesterol seminar, which is one of about 11 different topics that I have. And I want to thank you for being patient with us and just sitting through. And let's go on to questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, okay?